Ethan stood alone in the middle of the royal chamber. Bright blue lights shined from the crystal walls. Dozens of alien nobles looked down at him from their high seats. He could feel their eyes watching his every move, every breath, every blink, but he didn't flinch. He had trained for this moment. The aliens were the Zellery, a tall and elegant race with glowing skin, long silver hair, and eyes that shimmered like starlight. They wore floating robes and jeweled armor. To them, humans were small, weak, and uncivilized, and now a human stood in their sacred palace. In front of their entire court, the three princesses entered, with soft music playing behind them. They walked with pride and power each, one beautiful in a cold and untouchable way. The oldest, Princess Nyra, had a sharp face and colder eyes. The middle one, Vela, looked bored, filing her nails with a glowing crystal shard. The youngest, Siren, laughed before she even said a word. "What is that creature wearing?" she asked, pointing at Ethan. "Are those boots made of dead cow?" The court burst into laughter. Ethan remained silent, his face calm. He looked at them one by one, but said nothing. His jacket was dusty. His hair was a little messy, but his back was straight and his eyes steady. "Maybe it doesn't understand us," said Vela, with a fake pout. "Should we give it a banana?" Another wave of cruel laughter followed. Princess Nyra stepped closer, her voice like a sharp knife. "You were brought here to entertain us," she said. "We've never seen a real human before. Only in old books, smaller than I expected." "Added Siren, weak-looking," said Vela. They circled him like cats playing with a mouse. Ethan stayed still. He remembered the mission. This wasn't about pride. Not yet. He had to wait for the right moment. Then the music changed. The large doors opened, and the crowd grew quiet. All eyes turned toward the entrance. The king of the Zellery entered. He wore a dark robe covered in stardust patterns. His crown floated above his head, spinning slowly. Even the mocking sisters straightened up when he passed by. He stopped in front of Ethan and looked at him closely. A long silence filled the room. Then the king turned to face the court. "Find this amusing," he said slowly. "You mock the human, the last race that once stood equal to us." The crowd stayed quiet, confused by the king's serious tone. Even the sisters looked surprised. The king raised his hand, and a royal scribe stepped forward. "Read the law," the king commanded. The scribe opened a silver scroll and began to speak. "According to ancient royal code 11X, if any noble mocks a royal guest of peace, they must honor that guest in the highest way possible." The king turned to the princesses. "You mocked this human," he said, "and so, by royal law, each of you shall marry him." The entire room froze. No one laughed now. Even the air felt heavy. Like the palace itself had gone silent. Princess Nyra's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Vela dropped her nail crystal. Siren gasped. "This is a joke, right?" The king's face did not change. "There is no joke," he said. "This human will be your husband, and one day, perhaps, your prince." Ethan blinked once, but stayed calm inside. His heart was racing. This was not part of the plan. He came here to find something, to unlock something old and powerful. But now, things had changed. The sisters stared at him with horror. "I won't do it," said Nyra. "You will," the king replied. "Or you will lose your titles." Guards stepped forward and gently guided Ethan toward a door. The princesses watched him go in silence, their faces pale. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but deep down, a part of him whispered, "Let them laugh soon. They'll beg to stand beside me." As the doors closed behind him, the court remained quiet, and far below the palace, in the old tunnels of the royal vault, something ancient began to glow. The door closed behind Ethan with a soft hiss. He found himself in a grand guest chamber filled with floating lights and soft music from hidden walls, but he didn't care about the luxury. He stood quietly, hands behind his back, listening outside. The royal court was still silent, shaken by the king's command. Inside Ethan's mind, one thought echoed. This changes everything. Back in the throne room, the three sisters stood frozen. None of them had spoken since the king's royal decree. Finally, Naira stepped forward, her voice tight with anger. "Father, this is madness." The king turned slowly, his voice like thunder wrapped in silk. "No, this is justice. You mocked a guest under protection," he said. "Your bloodline's pride has blinded you." Vela crossed her arms. "He's a joke, not a husband. He is human." The king said, "And that makes him more than a joke. He is a reminder," Siren muttered. "We'll just scare him off." Naira nodded. "Yes, make him leave before the wedding." But the king heard them. "I would not be so sure," he said. "That human is not what he seems." He left the throne room with his guards. But not before giving the sisters one last look. "One cycle," he said. "Win his favor or lose your titles forever." The sisters were furious. In their private chamber, they argued and shouted. Naira paced across the floor. "We'll make him regret stepping into this palace." Vela smirked. "Let's show him how cruel royalty can be." Siren giggled. "This will be fun that night." Ethan's room was filled with strange sounds. Servants accidentally delivered spoiled food. His shower sprayed freezing water. The lights blinked on and off as if haunted. But Ethan sat calmly, staring at an old book from the palace archive. He was already decoding ancient text, royal genetics. "Sealed weapon, forgotten wars," he whispered. He smiled a little. "They still don't know why I'm really here." The next morning, the sisters arrived wearing their finest clothes, but their eyes burned with mischief. "We've come to show you the palace," said Naira sweetly. Ethan nodded politely. "Lead the way." They took him through long halls filled with ancient art and gold statues. Every step was a test, questions about Zellery history, traps hidden in jokes, secret paths to get him lost. But Ethan answered wisely, stayed on the right path, and noticed every detail. Siren whispered to Vela, "He's not as dumb as we thought." Vela frowned. "Still not husband material at lunch, they served him raw sea worm eggs. He ate them without a word, then asked, "Is this a wedding tradition?" Naira nearly choked. Ethan didn't smile, but his calm face made her feel off balance. He was not scared, not angry, not foolish, just quiet, like a deep ocean no one could read. Later that evening, Ethan slipped into the palace archives again. He used a small human tool from his belt, pressing it against a sealed wall. The wall shimmered, and a secret chamber opened. Inside were ancient symbols, maps. In a floating orb glowing with red light, he reached for it but stopped. "It's not time yet." He whispered behind him. Someone was watching Princess Naira, hidden in the shadows. She had followed him. But what she saw made her pause. Ethan didn't look like a weak human anymore. He looked like someone with purpose, power, and secrets. The next day, the king summoned Ethan again. This time, it was private only. The king, Ethan, and a map between them. "You understand now?" said the king. "I brought you here?" Ethan nodded. "The prophecy speaks of human return." "Yes." The king whispered, "and the war coming from the dark sector. You are not just a guest, you are the key." Ethan looked at the map of the galaxy. One part flashing red. "If I help you," Ethan said, "I don't want a crown." The king smiled. "You'll have something greater respect." Meanwhile, the sisters had stopped laughing. They met in their garden chamber, silent. For once, Vela stared at a flower that wilted in her hands. "Why is he not afraid of us?" Siren whispered. "Because he sees something we don't." Naira looked at the palace tower where Ethan stayed. "He's dangerous, but not in the way we thought." Then she added quietly, "Maybe father was right." But the sisters were not ready to lose. "We'll test him harder," Naira said, "until he breaks or bows." What none of them knew was that Ethan had already started to change the heart of their world, and deep under the palace, the red orb glowed brighter, waiting for the human to speak its name. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise. He stood near the window of his tower room, watching the twin suns rise over the silver mountains. His mind was not on beauty, but on the glowing red orb beneath the palace. He had seen similar tech before, long ago, buried deep inside forgotten human outposts. But this one felt alive. It was waiting, watching him, like a sleeping beast ready to speak. Before he could return to it, The chamber door opened. Naira entered with a forced smile. Behind her came Vela holding a tray of steaming blue tea, and Siren skipping like a child. "Good morning, husband Tubi," Vela said with a smirk. "We've planned something special today," Naira added. Ethan studied their eyes. He knew this wasn't kindness. They weren't giving up. They were planning another game. They led him to the royal garden, where floating platforms crossed above. "Ponds filled with firefish? The challenge?" "Cross to the other side without falling," said Siren, pretending to be sweet. The firefish were not just glowing, they were sharp-fanged and hot to the touch. Ethan nodded and stepped forward. The platforms were slippery, the wind strong, and the path unstable. But he moved carefully, using balance and patience halfway through. The platforms began to spin. "Oops," Vela whispered, faking innocence. Ethan almost slipped, but then crouched low and jumped across. Landing with quiet strength, the sisters blinked in surprise. Siren clapped slowly. "Maybe he's more than a monkey," Ethan simply said. That was fun. No anger, no complaint. It was harder to tease someone who didn't play along. Later that day, they brought him to the language chamber. Thousands of Zelari symbols floated midair like glowing dust. The challenge: translate ancient words aloud if you get 3 wrong. "The floor opens and drops you into the cold pool," Naira warned. Siren giggled. Very cold. Ethan looked up at the symbols. He paused only for a second, then began speaking, his voice calm. Slow, confident, one by one, the translations came. Strength, unity, humanity. The floor stayed solid. The sisters stared. "How do you know?" "Our ancient tongue?" Vela asked, almost whispering. Ethan answered simply. "I've been reading since I arrived." What he didn't say was that the ancient tongue was not Zelari, it was Old Terran. The lost human dialect used by explorers 600 years ago, the princesses. Didn't know their own language's true origin, but Ethan did, that night. Siren followed Ethan quietly. He slipped through a secret door beneath the library, moving through a glowing tunnel that led to the royal vault. He didn't know she was there, watching from the shadows. Ethan placed his hand on the orb again. This time it pulsed red and spoke in a low, deep voice. "Welcome, child of Earth," Siren gasped and took a step back. Ethan didn't turn around, but he heard her breath. "You shouldn't be here," he said gently. She stepped out, confused, shaken. "What is that thing?" "History," Ethan said. "Yours and mine for the first time." Siren looked at him without mockery. He wasn't just a human. He was unlocking pieces of her world that even her people had forgotten. "You're not here for marriage, are you?" She asked. "No," Ethan replied, "but I'll honor it if I must." She didn't laugh. She didn't joke. She walked away in silence the next morning. The sisters didn't prank Ethan. Instead, they watched him carefully. They whispered. Among themselves, "He doesn't fight us," said Vela. "He doesn't run," added Naira. Siren looked down, remembering the red orb. "He doesn't belong to us. But maybe we belong to him." They didn't know it yet. But the human had already begun to change them, not with power, not with threats, but with patience, strength, and something they had never seen in their world: humility. And beneath the palace, the ancient text spoke once more. "Awakening begins." The palace felt colder that morning. The air buzzed with quiet tension. Servants walked carefully. Nobles whispered in the halls. They had seen the king's decree, heard the human speak their ancient tongue now. They were no longer sure if Ethan was just a man or something more. Ethan sat alone in the royal library. Dozens of glowing books hovered around him, each one written in languages long forgotten. But he wasn't reading just for knowledge. He was following a path, a hidden pattern written across. History clues that pointed toward the truth of the Zelari and their connection to ancient Earth. That night, when the moons rose high, Ethan returned to the secret vault. He used the same human tool again, and the sealed door opened with a pulse of light inside. The red orb floated in silence. But tonight it was not alone. A circular platform surrounded the orb now. Symbols had appeared, Zelari symbols, but they matched Earth's oldest languages, Sumerian. Norse, Chinese. This was no ordinary vault. It was a Genesis chamber. Ethan stepped onto the platform. The orb glowed brighter and spoke in the voice of 1,000 echoes. You are the first human to enter in 600 cycles. State your code, Ethan responded, not with numbers, but with a phrase passed down in his family for generations. Iron and blood, stars and heart, peace by fire. The orb paused, then released a soft hum. Confirmed lineage. Earth Directive 1. A hidden chamber opened below the floor, revealing old armor pieces, human tech, fused with Zellery crystal, a helmet with breathing runes, gloves with pulse triggers, and a small badge marked with the Earth Alliance crest. Ethan reached down and picked up the badge. He whispered, I knew it. We were here first. Above him, he heard footsteps. Naira entered the chamber alone, her expression unreadable. Ethan didn't hide the orb or the armor. He let her see everything. She stepped forward slowly, eyes wide. This shouldn't exist. Ethan looked at her, calm, but it does. Naira touched the armor, her fingers trembling. These runes are on the royal banners, she whispered. We thought they were Zellery symbols. Ethan shook his head. They were human first? She turned toward the orb, now humming softly. This is forbidden knowledge, she said. Why are you showing me this? Because Ethan replied, you're the only one willing to face the truth. Naira didn't speak for a long time, then she asked the question that changed everything. What? Are we? Ethan pointed to the badge. You are descendants? He said Zellery blood was mixed with human DNA thousands of years ago. During the Great Exodus, your people forgot or erased the truth. But I came to remember it. Naira looked at him with new eyes. Not as an enemy, not as a joke, but as a mirror of something lost. I mocked you, she whispered. I didn't know who you were. Ethan replied gently. I didn't. Come here for revenge. I came here to reconnect what was broken. The orb pulsed again, and a star map appeared in the air. A red zone blinked on the edge of the galaxy. Hostile force detected approaching Zellery core activation. Of ancient defense required. Ethan stepped back, shocked. They're coming already. Naira stared at the map, her voice low. We're not ready for war. Ethan looked down at the armor. I wasn't sent to marry princesses, he said. I was sent to wake the weapons. Naira nodded slowly, then wake them all back. In her chamber, she told her sisters everything. Vela laughed at first, but stopped when Naira showed the Genesis badge. Siren sat in silence, eyes wide. He's one of the originals, she whispered. Maybe. The last, for the first time, the three sisters agreed on one thing. Ethan was not a toy, not a mistake. He was the turning point of their entire history, and down in the Genesis vault. The red orb spoke one final line that night. Human DNA confirmed, royal weapon access level unlocked. The sun rose slowly over the palace, but something had already changed. Ethan stood on the highest balcony in silence, the ancient armor pieces lying beside him. The metal was cold, but the energy inside it felt alive. He had unlocked secrets buried for centuries, but now came the harder part. Winning trust, earning belief, preparing a kingdom that didn't even know it was in danger. Down in the training grounds, the Zellery warriors practiced with their glowing staffs. They moved with beauty and speed, but Ethan saw the weakness in their formations. They had forgotten real war. They didn't understand how close death truly was. Then a voice called out from behind. Try fighting one of us instead of watching. It was Vela, dressed in royal armor, her long braid tied tight behind her head. She tossed him a training blade with a grin. Ethan caught it and smiled. Only if you promise not to cry. The match began. When within seconds, Vela realized she had made a mistake. Ethan moved fast, too fast. He ducked, dodged, countered. All without using a single energy pulse. He didn't fight like a noble. He fought like a survivor. After he disarmed her, he helped her up without saying a word. Vela looked into his eyes and saw no pride, no mocking, just quiet strength. She walked away, her heart pounding. She didn't understand why she felt small next to him, not because he was human, but because he was better. Later that day, Siren visited Ethan in the garden. She didn't speak much, just sat beside him on the edge of a glowing fountain. After a long silence, she finally asked, "What did it feel like when the orb called your name?" Ethan looked at the water, like remembering something I was born to forget. Siren turned her head. "Do you think we're really part human?" Ethan answered softly. "I think you're more human than you know." She didn't laugh. Not this time.
Right.
She just sat there with him until the suns went down. That evening, Princess Naira stood in the war room with Ethan. She had changed to less anger in her voice, more thought in her eyes. She helped him study the red zone on the map. The invading force was getting closer. Unknown ships, strange signals, old enemies from the shadows. Ethan tapped a blinking point on the star chart. "We have one chance to wake the vaults on the outer moons. They hold weapons your people were never meant to forget." Naira nodded. "Then we leave tonight." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "You're coming with me?" "I mocked you," she said. "It's time I do something useful." The next morning, word spread across the palace. The human was leaving, and the oldest princess was going with him. Whispers grew louder. Why would a princess follow a man she once hated? Why would she train beside him in silence? Ethan didn't care about rumors. He cared about time, cared about waking the weapons. But even he noticed the difference in how the sisters looked at him now. Vela began practicing human combat drills in secret. Siren started learning human languages from the archives. Naira asked questions about Earth's lost history. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand. And when Ethan walked the halls now, nobles didn't laugh anymore. Some nodded, others stepped aside. Even the royal guards began to salute without being ordered. The human who had once been a joke had become something more, a force that moved quietly, but shook everything he touched, and in the darkness of space, the enemy ships drew closer. But inside the palace, 3 alien sisters who once mocked the human now stood beside him, not out of fear, not because of law, but because he had earned something far more rare: their respect. Dark clouds rolled over the palace sky. Lightning flashed in strange colors, painting the towers in red and blue. The warning alarms rang across the city. The enemy had entered Zalari space. Ships unlike anything the people had ever seen moved like shadows through the stars. And in the center of it all stood Ethan, no longer seen as just the human now. He was their only chance, inside the command hall. Ethan wore the full ancient armor, silver plates wrapped in glowing veins of energy. The Earth Alliance badge pulsed softly on his chest. His eyes burned with focus. The sisters stood with him, Naira on his right, Vela and Siren behind, each one armored and ready. The king watched from his throne with silent pride. He didn't give an order, he simply said, "It's yours now." Ethan stepped onto the central platform and looked at the generals and nobles who once mocked him. He pointed to the star map, where enemy ships closed in fast. "They don't want your throne," he said. "They want your extinction." The room fell silent. Then Ethan spoke the words that changed everything. "I won't lead as your ruler," he said. "I'll lead as your shield." He raised his hand. And the palace systems responded. Ancient weapons unlocked. Planetary defenses came online. For the first time in centuries, the Zalari war grid awoke, and it answered to him. The princesses worked fast. Naira commanded fleet formations, her voice clear and sharp. Vela handled the code systems, unlocking long-forgotten commands with speed. Siren controlled the drone swarm, her hands moving across glowing panels with ease. The enemy fleet appeared above the outer moon, dark, sharp, and silent. But Ethan's forces were ready. He stood at the front of the command ship, wrapped in armor, not just a symbol of old humanity, but the proof that it had returned. As the ships flew forward, Ethan gave the first command. "Strike now, while they think we're still afraid." The human-led fleet hit fast and hard plasma cannons, energy shields, shockwave missiles. The enemy expected hesitation. Instead, they met fury inside the ship. Ethan moved through fire and smoke, helping wounded soldiers, guiding frightened pilots. He didn't hide behind walls, he fought beside them. Even the Zalari warriors who once ignored him now followed his lead without question. And when enemy boarding parties tried to storm the capital ship, Ethan met them face to face. His blade flashed, his movements perfect. Alien enemies fell before him, not just because he was strong, but because he was focused, fearless, filled with something they had forgotten. Human will. Hours passed. And the battle turned, enemy ships began to retreat. Ethan stood on the bridge, blood on his armor, smoke rising behind him. He didn't cheer. He just looked at the screen and said, "Next time they'll send more." Back on the palace landing platform, the royal crowd gathered. The king stepped forward with a crown in his hand, floating, golden, glowing with ancient energy, but Ethan raised his hand. "I didn't do this for a crown," he said. The crowd went silent. Then Naira stepped forward and spoke for them all. "Then wear it for us." The people began to chant not his name, but his title, heir of two worlds. The man they once laughed at now stood above them all, not because he demanded it, but because he proved it, from a mocked outsider to the leader. Of their future, the human had risen, and the stars would remember this day. The palace stood tall, but the world around it had changed. The battle was won. The enemy pushed back into the void, but the people of Zelari would never forget who had led them. Not a prince, not a god, not one of their own, but a human Ethan. He had walked into their court a stranger, mocked by nobles, humiliated by royalty, laughed at by the very sisters who now stood beside him. But step by step, he had earned their trust, their loyalty, and their hearts. The three princesses walked through the royal gardens. They were no longer the same women who had once played cruel games. Naira spoke carefully now, her words chosen with thought. Vela smiled less. But when she did, it was real. Siren no longer laughed to hide her fear. She had found her voice in battle. They didn't wear their crowns today. They wore light robes. Walking side by side, watching the people prepare for the new ceremony. Not a wedding, not a coronation, something different, something new. Ethan stood before the grand statue being built in the center of the capital square. It wasn't his idea. He didn't want his face carved into stone, but the people insisted, not because he fought, but because he changed them. He helped them remember where they came from. He taught them how to stand when they were about to fall. He didn't conquer them. He healed them as the sun set. The king stepped forward with a message to the crowd. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning. We mocked the human, but he became more than one of us. He became our guide, our sword, and our light." Ethan looked. Around the plaza, he saw children waving small earth flags beside Zelari banners. He saw alien veterans salute with pride. He saw the sisters watching him not as royalty, but as family. He stepped up to the speaker's platform, but didn't raise his voice. He spoke softly. "You laughed when I came. You called me weak, dirty, small, and I forgive you." The crowd stood silent, listening to every word. "I came here to complete a mission," he continued. "But I stayed because I saw something worth saving. You're not perfect, but you can be better, and I'll walk beside you to make that future real." The people didn't cheer right away. They stood in quiet respect. Then one voice shouted from the crowd, "Long live the human king." Then another, "Long live Ethan of Earth." Then the crowd roared with one voice, shaking the towers, "Heir of two worlds, heir of two worlds." That night no one slept. Lanterns floated into the sky. Music filled the air, and somewhere in the stars, the same enemy who had fled watched. The transmission, and one whispered in fear, "They've awakened a human king." In the palace garden, Ethan stood beneath the starlight. Naira approached and said, "You could leave no return to Earth, live like a hero." Ethan smiled. "I could," he said, "but heroes fade, kings build." She touched his arm gently, "Then build with us." And so he stayed, not for power, not for pride, but because sometimes the one who was mocked the most becomes the one the galaxy remembers the longest.